Our Adrian Wojnarowski reporting the Knicks All-Star is now open to waiving that no-trade clause if it means he's going to either the Rockets or the Cavs. Melo was owed more than $26 million next season. With more, here's ESPN Knicks reporter Ian Begley.
Chris Paul plays a key role in Carmelo Anthony's future in the NBA at the moment. I'm told that Chris, for months now, has been talking about wanting to play with Carmelo. The talk started as early as January before the trade deadline, and it's been as recent as a couple of days before he came over to the Houston Rockets. He's made it clear to friends that he wants to pair up with Carmelo. In fact, if Chris Paul had re-signed with the Clippers, I'm told that the Knicks and the Clippers had the framework of a deal in place to send Melo to L.A. Now that Chris is with Houston, you're going to see talks between the Knicks and the Rockets continue here to try to get something done, sending Melo to Houston. Obviously, it's a tough deal to execute, given the fact that the Knicks are unwilling to take back Ryan Anderson. At this point, they're looking for younger players, shorter contracts, because they see themselves in a rebuild at the moment. You know, Cleveland obviously is also in play here. That's also a tough deal to get done. We're looking at probably a third team needing to get involved with either the Cavs or the Rockets to get a Carmelo trade done. And the Knicks, to this point, have not entertained the idea of buying Carmelo out and letting him walk as a free agent. But I don't think that's off the table. I mean, if things continue to be tough to get a trade together here, you know, the Knicks are looking to move on from Carmelo, and I think Carmelo is looking to put himself in a winning situation. So I think both sides, if it came down to it, would eventually come to that buyout agreement to go their separate ways.
All right, Ian, thanks for that. Now, Melo has the third highest scoring average in NBA history among players who never reached the NBA Finals. That puts him in the same group as George Gervin, Dominique Wilkins, Pistol Pete Maravich. Now, he did reach the conference finals once back in 2009, a feat that new Rockets member Chris Paul has yet to accomplish despite playing in 76 postseason games.
To baseball now, the Dodgers.
Kevin Agati.
Now that we got that out of the way, this morning we now know it is not all New York or nothing for Carmelo, as he's indicated he is open to some new scenery.
Yes, he is, Lindsay. Developing story this morning. Our Adrian Wojnarowski reporting Carmelo open to waiving his no-trade clause to join the Houston Rockets or Cleveland Cavaliers. All contingent, of course, to those teams being able to come up with a deal the Knicks would like. Houston has been pursuing possible trade scenarios with James Harden and the addition of Chris Paul. Cleveland, of course, has LeBron James. One reason Melo was looking at those two contenders may be his lack of postseason success. He has the third highest scoring average in NBA history among players who never reached the NBA Finals. In the same company as George Gervin, Dominique Wilkins, and Pistol Pete Maravich. The furthest he's gotten is the 2009 Western Conference Finals with the Nuggets. That was against the Lakers, guys.
Thank you, Jay Harris. So for more now on this story, we bring in NBA reporter Chris Haynes. So, Chris, when you're looking at the Cavs and the Rockets, which of those two is best suited to make a deal if we're talking assets?
If we're talking assets and we're talking trades in particular, then I think it's Cleveland. It's been well documented over the last year. Cleveland has been trying to unload Kevin Love for Carmelo Anthony. I think at the end of the day, if that deal is still on the table, which I'm told they're still open, that can be had. Houston is trying to get rid of Ryan Anderson. He has 3 years left on his deal, worth $60 million. Adrian Wojnarowski pointed that out. But New York Knicks, with the new regime, the current regime that's in it right now, it's going to change over the offseason. They're not willing to take on a guy like that. They're trying to get into the rebuilding mode, bring in young guys and assets. So if you're talking about somebody who's going to help and bring back value in return for Carmelo, Kevin Love seems like the next best
Does that upgrade the Cavs?
Well, let me tell you this. That's a good question. You know, it's like when rookies come into the league. There's always that intrigue about a rookie. It's the unknown. I think the Cavaliers feel with Kevin Love, especially with the way Golden State is equipped over there, bringing back virtually everybody, they feel like they know their ceiling with Kevin Love and how they stack up with the Golden State Warriors. With Carmelo Anthony into the fold, it's the unknown. It's that, okay, we can get to that point, but it's that intrigue of not knowing what your ceiling is. I think they feel like they have a pretty good gauge on where they stand as constructed now.
We also can't ignore the relationship that LeBron James has with Carmelo Anthony, the idea of playing together, and you're bringing that offensive scoring there. It's interesting, though, if we do talk about a scenario where the Cavaliers are making a trade with the Knicks, and you look at who's pulling the trigger, because we do not have permanent GMs in the position at both places here. Is there a timetable on moving Melo?
Well, we were always told that there was a possibility that Carmelo could relocate during this offseason. So this is something that can happen at any moment, regardless who's there in the front office. But it is kind of interesting to see that Carmelo is willing to get out now that there seems like the dysfunction is already out the window in Phil Jackson. So, but I think Chris Paul in Houston kind of changed that too. That gave him another option. Before it was just Cleveland being the next path to being able to contend for a title. Now he has two options. But I think when you're looking at that loaded Western Conference, the great migration out west,
yes.
I think if he was to go to Cleveland, that is a clear path for him to meet what everybody thinks will probably be the Warriors again in the finals.
That is a great point. You stay in the East and you have a shot right now, the way things are looking. Chris is going to be back during the 9 o'clock hour for much more around the NBA.
And one of those discussions that we're going to be talking about is Paul Millsap, who's come a long way from his initial contract as the 47th overall pick with the Jazz. He didn't crack $10 million a year until his current deal with the Hawks. But this new contract, according to reports, Paul George joining Russell Westbrook was just one of the moves that shocked us this offseason so far. And now Carmelo Anthony is open to an NBA existence outside of New York, as long as it's Cleveland or Houston. And after meeting with Houston, Andre Iguodala has decided he is staying put with the NBA's favorite super team. And the Cavaliers, they still don't have a GM. Those just some of the headlines from the past couple days. It has been a crazy week thus far in the NBA. Max Bretos takes a look back.
Lots going on in the association. Let's recap the craziness of the NBA in the past week, shall we? Russell Westbrook secured his first MVP with a moving speech to boot.
I couldn't be able to do none of this without you guys. My road dog. You're my role model.
His Airness Michael Jordan even had something to say to Russ.
The ceiling is the roof. Let's make it happen.
James Harden may not have won the MVP, but the Rockets did land CP3 in H-Town. James, your thoughts? Paul George is headed from Indy to OKC. How do you feel about that, Russ?
That's pretty interesting.
Jimmy Butler opened up in Minnesota.
My phone's in my back pocket right now. 773-899-6071.
Butler even had time for FaceTime. Phil Jackson and the Knicks have parted ways, and Jackson was on the first bus out of town. Steph Curry signed the biggest deal in NBA history. 5 years, $201 million. J.J. Redick is on his way to Philly, and Joel Embiid took to Twitter to remind us to trust the process. Rudy Gobert, Isaiah Thomas, and Hassan Whiteside all made their pitches to Gordon Hayward over social media. But we still don't know where Hayward will land, at least for now.
Some big players making some big numbers, right? Cashing in. Big figures being handed out in the NBA offseason. We're going to give you our best big numbers. 3 players from last year's Eastern Conference All-Star team are heading to the West. Jimmy Butler, Paul George, and now Paul Millsap to the Nuggets. 13 of the top 14 players in ESPN's NBA rank are now out west, Kev.
Yeah, the NBA offseason undefeated. Steph Curry struck gold over the weekend. There are maxes and then super maxes. How about a 5-year deal worth over $200 million? That figure of $40 million per makes him the highest paid player, not just in the association, but in all 4 major professional sports in America.
Kev, he's hardly alone, though. There have been 4 deals handed out in the last 48 hours that average at least $30 million per year. That matches the total in NBA history entering this free agency. This year's recipients, Blake Griffin, Kyle Lowry, Paul Millsap, and Steph Curry. For no more, let's welcome in NBA analyst Antonio Davis. All right, my man, we learned overnight Carmelo Anthony open to waiving his no-trade clause to go to the Rockets or the Cavaliers. Which team do you see being a better fit for Melo's talents?
You know, right now, when you look at these teams and what they're trying to do, and they're obviously trying to win a championship, I'm going to send them to Houston. I just feel like in Houston, with the way that they move the ball and shoot the ball, and there's not a lot of defense being played anyway, Melo fits right in. You can move him to that 4 spot. Now you have he and Ryan Anderson who can go out there, stretch the floor, still defensively play the way that you need them to play. And I think Melo's just at this place now where, you know, he's ready to win. getting to the playoffs and have an opportunity to win a championship. So with him, CP3, I mean, you're going to need some more basketball sooner or later. But Mike D'Antoni, that's never been a problem. They've been able to share the ball.
It's intriguing, Melo and D'Antoni.
Exactly. That's the first thing I thought about.
Exactly.
That's very interesting.
All right, let's talk about the biggest free agent still on the board here, and that is Gordon Hayward. Max mentioned he doesn't get all the hype. Put up very similar numbers to two other players at his position that just moved this past week. The headliners, Jimmy Butler and Paul George, all were all-stars last season, averaging over 20 points per, shot well from three, and you could also say they've all three drawn interest from the Celtics. When you watch this kid's game, what stands out from Gordon Hayward?
The biggest thing for me is just his upside, first of all. This is a kid that came into the league averaging 5 points a game, is now averaging 20 points a game. He's gotten better each and every year. In this game of having small forwards who can score the basketball, like those guys you just showed, he's in the upper echelon of those guys. He can knock down a three, he can get to the basket, he's working on his mid-range game, and he was on a team that got to the playoffs, and he was an integral part of that team. So it shows that not only does his numbers show that, he's going to consistently get better, has great body and great size, and that's what every team needs at this particular point in time. If the Clippers would have had a guy like this the last 3 or 4 years, it would have been a different story in L.A.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Yes.
And you mentioned he took that team, you know, the playoffs in the West.
In the West.
The idea you put him in Boston or you put him in Miami in the East?
Yes. And then with all those guys going west, I think I'm heading east.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
I'm going to find a way to.
You said Melo would be better suited for Houston. If you put him on that team, they beat the Warriors?
You know, I think there's a chance, you know, because of the only thing that they were missing is the quality of shots that they were getting. Melo, to me, still is able to bring high-quality shots. He's going to get enough shots for sure, but now you got another guy who's in that space where if we get to the playoffs in a big game, maybe we have another guy who can knock down a shot or two.
I'm watching who has the ball late.
It's going to be fun.
CP3, the Beard, or a guy like Melo, if they're all together.
Hey, you put it in the Beard's hand, you let him get to the basket, but he has several options. You can't help.
Yes.
So now you're talking a different story.
Antonio, thank you so much.
Thank you.
In 5-3. Yeah, we got 2 more hours of this. Fine. Lee Jarniak, Jay Harris, Kevin Agati with you. It's 8 o'clock on the East Coast.
Oh, is it really? Tim Kirkchin is going to join us in about 10 minutes with more on the MLB All-Star rosters, including one notable difference between Aaron Judge and Jose Altuve.
But we're going to begin with our top story this morning involving Carmelo Anthony's future. Yes. Adrian Wojnarowski reporting Carmelo open to waiving his no-trade clause to join the Houston Rockets or the Cleveland Cavaliers. All contingent, of course, to those teams being able to come up with a deal the Knicks would like. Houston's been pursuing possible trade scenarios with James Harden and the addition of Chris Paul. Cleveland, of course, has LeBron James. LeBron James. One reason Melo is looking at those two contenders may be his lack of postseason success. He has the 3rd highest scoring average in NBA history among players who never reached the NBA Finals. In the same company as George Gervin, Dominique Wilkins, and Pistol Pete Maravich. The furthest he's gotten is the 2009 Western Conference Finals when he was with the Nuggets. That was against the Lakers. Lindsay.
Thanks, Jay Harris. We're thankful to have our insider, Tom Penn, here. He came skipping in.
Good morning.
Energy. Good morning to you. Okay, so.
Mellow Monday, huh?
Very good.
Huh?
How do the Rockets make this happen? We know they've already acquired Chris Paul, so how could they, asset-based, go ahead and lock this up with Carmelo Anthony?
Tricky to see because, well, we know Melo has a no-trade clause. He'll waive the no-trade clause. The next thing he has is a 15% trade kicker. That means more money for Melo. So he can get 15% of the remaining 53 or 54 million, whatever it is he has on his deal. That complicates things. Now, he can waive part of that to make the deal work. So back to the Rockets. What do they have to give up? They're not going to give up. So they're over the cap, right?
Right.
So if they're going to bring on his mid-20s to upper 30s with a trade kicker deal, they're going to have to give up about that much money. So you start talking about Ryan Anderson at $20 million. You start talking about Eric Gordon at $12 million. Do they aggregate some of those guys to make it work? And is that what the Knicks want back? right? That's the next question. So it's not easy by any means, and then he's got to go play for a coach he's got some experience with.
And it's interesting, he's owed $54 million over the next 2 seasons. So how do they make that work with the cap?
That's what I was talking about. The Rockets have to give up just about as much money as they take in.
Right.
So if they're going to bring in Melo's 26, and let's say he waives his trade kicker, they have to give up at least 20, 22, 23, and you start looking at Ryan Anderson as the first guy to go because he makes about 20. Is that exciting enough for the Knicks? And the Rockets don't have any draft picks to give up because they already gave a pick to the Clippers to get Chris Paul. So you'd have to wait for the Rockets' 2020 draft pick. And look, if I'm the Knicks, I want an asset back that complements Porzingis. I'm doing every decision based on Kristaps Porzingis and how it creates complementary talent to grow up with him. And I don't know that Anderson does that.
And I think the other interesting thing is Carmelo's history with Mike D'Antoni.
Yeah.
So what do you know about that and about Melo's willingness and desire to be back with him after things didn't end so well between the two?
Didn't go well there. They had a rough go of it.
Right.
Melo is a different character when he's the main character. When you put him on an all-star team, he behaves differently. USA Basketball, he plays differently. He falls more in line. Then he's just the major league scorer that you need him to be. He's not everything. The problem with Carmelo is if you need him to be everything, your best player, your leader, doesn't quite work. We've seen what happens. So I think Mike D'Antoni in a system with a really strong Chris Paul and with the almost co-MVP James Harden, Melo would fall in line with those two guys and be one of 3. And then you get a good version of Carmelo.
Okay, so then you think D'Antoni doesn't become an issue in terms of the relationship between the two of them?
I think it's a lot easier for Mike D'Antoni to put him more in a USA Basketball mode than in a lead dog mode from an NBA team.
Tom Penn, thank you. Always.
The Knicks are aware that he wants out. Now is the time that he needs to be gone. I'd like to see Melo in Washington.
Boston.
Houston.
The Clippers.
The one team that he would accept the buyout for is Cleveland. At this point, anywhere else seems better, right?
Well, Melo should ask for a trade. I'm surprised he hasn't did it by now. Carmelo's a terrific player. Why would you want to finish your career on a bad team?
The drama between Melo and the Knicks never seems to come to an end. And sometimes I don't even think it's Melo's fault. SportsCenter AM.
Right? It's all the buzz around him.
Yes.
Yeah, a little bit. It's that New York vibe. Yes, but an ending could now be in sight, as a matter of fact, because the news breaking late last night could be the first step to Carmelo moving on from the Knicks. Jay?
Yeah, Lindsay, Kevin, apparently Anthony now open to the idea of waiving his no-trade clause if the landing spot is either Houston or Cleveland. That, according to our Adrian Wojnarowski. A move to the Rockets or Cavaliers would end Carmelo's tenure in New York after 7 seasons, including the last 4 that ended without a playoff appearance. So much is made of Carmelo's lack of success in the playoffs, but it's a short list of players who've averaged 25 points per game in the postseason. Among those with at least 1,000 career playoff points, his 25.7 average ranks 4th behind KD, LeBron, and Steph Curry. Kevin?
Usually it's the offseason, not the offseason for this guy. That is Knicks ESPN reporter Ian Bailey, who joins us this morning. What can you tell us about the discussions the Knicks have had with various teams to move Melo?
So far, Kevin, with Houston, not much traction. Houston at one point offered Ryan Anderson in a deal, and the Knicks said that they were not interested. So it seems like the Rockets, the Cavs, or maybe any other team would need to find a third team in this deal to really make it work. You know, the interesting thing here is I think Chris Paul might be pushing the Rockets to get something done because, you know, as far back as January, Chris was telling friends that he wanted Carmelo on his team. Of course, then he was with the Clippers. Now he's in Houston. But I'm told before Chris went to Houston, back when there was uncertainty surrounding his future with the Clippers had something that was pretty much in place with the Knicks that would have sent Carmelo to the Clippers if Chris had re-signed there. So Chris is a driving force here, and I think he's going to continue to be one until a deal for Carmelo gets done.
All right, there is one guy, though, that I think the public, you know about him, but the public is getting to know a little bit about him. That's Steve Mills. He replaced Phil Jackson as the guy behind the scenes with the Knicks. How does that affect the Knicks' approach in this situation, also the rest of the summer?
The Knicks were going to be cautious with Phil Jackson here, and they're going to continue to be cautious with Steve Mills here. You know, their goals, whether it's a Carmelo Anthony trade, whether it's a free agent signing, are to get young and to not commit huge long-term money this summer. So in any Carmelo deal, you know, they want to get younger players back, preferably on shorter deals, and that's why they said no to Ryan Anderson. The same thing goes in free agency. You know, they don't have a ton of money, but they don't want to make any long-term commitments. They feel like, hey, we have Kristaps Porzingis here, we have Billy Hernangomez, we have Frank Ntilikina, and we have our draft picks going forward, so let's just start this thing over, and that's part of the motivation to get Carmelo Anthony off the roster at this point.
The Knicks showing restraint. All right, that is something that's very new. Clearly the Steve Mills effect. Ian Begley with us this morning on the Knicks. Let's go to the Rockets' perspective. Lindsay?
Yes, thank you, Kevin. I'm here with Chris Haynes once again. So what have you heard in terms of what the Rockets could do to get Carmelo Anthony? What could they give?
Well, look, it's going to have to involve a third team because the Knicks right now, as Kevin Adani just gave a proper shot at the Knicks, they're showing restraint right now, not trying to bring in huge contracts. Look, the situation is this. Carmelo Anthony does want to go to either Houston or Cleveland, but the assets are just not there right now. It would take, look, they can do a straight up of Ryan Anderson and one of those non-guaranteed deals to get the deal done, but the Knicks right now are not operating in that motive. So it's going to be tough. It's going to take a third team, but I think it's a likely chance that he ends up somewhere else. But pertaining to Houston, I think that's where our guy Tom Penn will probably have the best outlook on how that can get done.
And we're going to get ready to throw it right over there. But you don't mean somewhere else besides Houston, Cleveland, right? Is there somewhere we're not thinking about?
I'm saying Cleveland. I think a one-for-one swap is something that the Knicks have done before, trying to get Carmelo, giving up Kevin Love from that situation. But things have changed. There's a new regime working out there right now, so we don't know if they're still under the same parameters.
All right, so now we want to hear more on that perspective of the Cleveland scenario. Jay Harris, we're going to toss it to you.
All right, Lindsay, thank you. And front office insider Tom Penn is going to work the touchscreen. All right, show us how New York could send Melo to Cleveland.
So the money isn't as important here cap-wise. What's important is they're over the cap, which means if they're going to bring in his $26 million, or it could be more, by the way, if that's going to come in, almost that much has to go out, right? So you start looking, and I said it could be more because Carmelo has a trade kicker. Mm-hmm. He's owed $54 million. 15% of that he could get unless he waives it. So that's an additional $8.1 million that would be spread. So his number is going to be 26 to maybe 30. So if it's coming in, who's coming out? And that's why it's Kevin Love, because it's not going to be that one. It's not going to be that one. So Kevin Love is the trade that would work. That's clean and simple, works nice and easy. He comes in. But we just heard that the Knicks have other ideas. If they're going to actually show some restraint and try to do what they should do, which is focus on him, build around him, and build around him, and build around the young players going forward, then I don't know that this guy fits into that program, does he?
No.
So if he's not coming in, that's when you get into this third team option. And where could Kevin Love go to bring back more complementary players so the Knicks could build around Porzingis? So that's why it's tricky to do. And you're talking about two teams that don't really have their functioning normal general manager there. And when you do a three-team trade, it gets trickier and much harder, especially when Melo's got a trade kicker.
So Love's the only guy you see. There could be no combination of any other Cavs players, and they keep Love.
Really?
Somehow.
I mean, what are they going to do? Shumpert and Tristan Thompson?
I don't know.
Well, you know, that's if we went through it all, you'll just look at it and each time go, no, no. So I showed you the clean one. We could add up other numbers, but the talent won't work.
Okay.
In my opinion.
Okay. All right. Tom's back at 9:30 Eastern to help us talk about what the Warriors have been up to this weekend. Tom Penn, thank you, sir.
11 a.m. on the East Coast, 8 a.m. in Salinas, California. Did you know it was a salad bowl of the world?
No.
There you go.
Is that a real thing?
I swear to you. Google it.
You would not make that up. I don't think you would. Michael Lee's Antonietta Collins here on a Monday. On the way, we'll hear from Venus Williams. As I mentioned, following her win today, of course, she's also facing a lawsuit following a traffic accident back here in the States. She has not spoken publicly We're expected to see if she will address it today. Plus a recap of MLB's All-Star rosters. But we start with the ongoing drama that is the NBA offseason. Sources telling ESPN that Carmelo Anthony is open to waiving his no-trade clause for a move to the Rockets or Cavs if the Knicks can orchestrate a deal with either of those specific teams. Houston has been actively trying to pursue a deal for the 10-time All-Star since acquiring Chris Paul from the Clippers. We'll get more on that coming up a little bit later with Ian Begley. Now, when you talk about Carmelo Anthony and his career and also Chris Paul, they have something in common, never reaching the NBA Finals. Now, Melo has the third highest scoring average in NBA history among players who've never reached the Finals. In the same company as George Gervin, Dominique Williams, and Pistol Pete Maravich. He did reach the conference finals once, though, back in 2009, a feat that New Rockets member Chris Paul has yet to accomplish despite playing in 76 playoff games.
Meanwhile, the free agency exodus west continued last night. The Nuggets landed free agent forward Paul Millsap with a 3-year, $90 million contract. The 32-year-old made his fourth straight All-Star appearance last season with the Hawks. Millsap averaged 18.1 points and 7.7 rebounds per game last season. Now, take a look at this. He's come a long way from his initial contract as a 47th overall pick with the Jazz. He didn't crack $10 million per year until his current deal with the Hawks. But this new contract, according to reports, will vault him into a whole new universe at $30 million per year for 3 years.
Well, Kyle Lowry, speaking of $30 million, he's going to stay in Toronto after signing or agreeing to sign a 3-year, $100 million deal. He had thought about going some other places, but he said, you know what? This is my NBA home. That is Toronto. He also went on to say that my heart is telling me that this is the best city in the world, with the best basketball fans in the world. It's telling me that the Raptors can be a championship-level team sooner rather than later, and I'll be honest, and don't hate me, it's telling me that I've still never had poutine. Kyle, get on it. It's really, really good.
Is it really?
Oh, it's phenomenal, especially in Toronto.
All right, I'll trust you. I'll trust you. Meanwhile, Gordon Hayward's free agency tour continues today, this time with a familiar face. The Jazz will get their chance to meet with Hayward about re-signing with Utah. GM Dennis Lindsey, Coach Quinn Snyder, and team president Steve Starks are among those who will be present at the meeting. Hayward met over the weekend with the Heat and the Celtics. Now, Hayward may be the biggest name left on the market, and while he doesn't get all the hype, he has put up very similar numbers to two other players at his position that just changed teams. We're talking about Jimmy Butler and Paul George. Hayward joined his fellow All-Star small forwards with 20 points and 5 boards per game, all while putting up the most efficient season of his career.
All right, now to baseball. And in case you haven't been paying attention, the Nationals are living their best life right now. Washington owns the largest division lead in the National League. Max Scherzer is a no-hitter waiting to happen every time he steps on the mound. And Bryce Harper's hair is everything. So how did Nationals fans show love for what their favorite team is doing for their feelings in 2017? By voting 3 starters onto the NL All-Star team, who will be joined by 2 other